12 secret affairs Hollywood spent fortunes to bury. The night she wasn't allowed to come, June 1967. Spencer Tracy died at 6 in the morning. The woman who had loved him for 27 years was 15 minutes away. She was not allowed to come. She waited until the family left the church, then she went alone. 27 years, and she had to sneak into his funeral like a stranger. That is not a love story. That is what Hollywood's system did to the people inside it, and Katharine Hepburn is just the beginning. Here is what this video is actually about. 12 affairs. 12 sets of decisions made by people with everything to lose. And in every single case, someone who wasn't the star ended up carrying the damage. A 14-year-old girl stabbed a man to death to protect her mother. Nobody asked why her mother let that man into the house in the first place. A woman lost custody of her 10-year-old daughter, not because of an affair, but because her husband had been quietly collecting evidence for years and waited for exactly the right moment to use it. A man knew his biological daughter's identity for 25 years. He worked on the same studio lot. He never said a word. A woman heard her marriage was ending on the radio. Her husband had called the press before he called her. These are not gossip. These are documented facts that the official version of Hollywood history spent decades burying. Some of what you are about to hear will make you angry. Some of it will make you look at films you love very differently. And at least one of these stories, the one involving a custody battle that nobody talks about, will completely change the way you understand what Hollywood's most celebrated scandal was actually about. Let's start with the man who worked 15 feet from his own daughter and acted like she didn't exist. Clark Gable knew exactly what he was doing. In 1935, Clark Gable and Loretta Young began filming The Call of the Wild on location in Washington State. What happened on that remote shoot produced a pregnancy, and what happened after that has been described for decades as a mutual cover-up between two frightened people trying to protect their careers. That framing is too generous to Gable. Young was 22 years old, publicly Catholic, and mortified. She disappeared to Europe, gave birth in secret, returned to Hollywood, and announced she was adopting a 2-year-old girl named Judy. The story held for years. Young presented herself as the devoted adoptive mother. The industry accepted this. Gable said nothing. For 25 years. Now consider what Gable actually knew. He knew that child was his. He knew Young was raising her alone under a false identity. And he knew that Judy, as she grew, inherited his most distinctive physical feature, the prominent ears that every person in Hollywood recognized immediately whenever they looked at her. He was filming at the same studio lot, sometimes within a few hundred yards of a child who was his daughter and had never been told. Judy Lewis was in her 30s before she found out the truth. She did not find out from her mother. She did not find out from Gable. She found out from a magazine article that connected the pieces. Gable died in 1960 without ever having a single direct conversation with her about who she was. That is not a man overwhelmed by circumstances. That is a man who made a calculated decision for 25 years and never once revised it. Gary Cooper and the doctor he called. In 1948, Patricia Neal was 22 years old and had just signed her first major studio contract. Gary Cooper was 47, one of the most admired actors in America, and already a legend. They began an affair during the filming of The Fountainhead. Cooper told people close to him that he had never felt anything like it, that she was unlike anyone he had encountered, that the connection was completely real. When Patricia Neal became pregnant, Cooper did not offer to leave his wife. He did not suggest they find a way through it together. He contacted a studio physician and made an arrangement. Neal went through with the procedure. She wrote about it decades later in her memoir. She described the aftermath, not just the physical experience, but the years of guilt that followed. And she said something that is worth sitting with. She said, "I would never get over this. Ever." Cooper returned to his wife. He returned to his career. He continued playing men of unshakable integrity in film after film for the next decade. The Academy gave him the second Oscar in 1952 for High Noon. He accepted it gracefully. Neal went on to become one of the finest actresses of her generation. She suffered a series of devastating strokes in the 1960s and rebuilt her career through pure determination. She was nominated for Academy Awards. She became, by any measure, someone of genuine courage. She also carried what happened in 1948 for the rest of her life. Not as a scandal, as a wound. Cooper made one decision. She paid for it for 50 years. The night Frank Sinatra's wife heard it on the radio. In 1949, Frank Sinatra was 33 years old, married to Nancy Barbato, and the father of 3 children, including a 7-year-old girl named Nancy Jr. He was also the most famous popular singer in America, and his career was beginning to slip. Ava Gardner was 26. She had been in Hollywood since she was 18. She had already survived one marriage to Mickey Rooney and another to musician Artie Shaw, both of them disasters of different kinds. She was, by every account from people who knew her, one of the most stunning and complicated women of her generation. Sinatra met her in 1949 and decided, with the kind of certainty that tends to destroy everything it touches, that she was the person he needed to be with. The problem was everything else in his life. What happened next was not private. Nancy Sinatra Sr. found out about the affair through a combination of industry rumor and, at the critical moment, a radio broadcast. A gossip columnist announced Sinatra's intention to seek a divorce while Nancy was at home with her children. She did not receive a phone call first. She heard it on the radio. The divorce became one of the most publicly documented marital collapses in the entertainment industry's history up to that point. Nancy said in interviews that she never fully understood what had happened to her marriage. Frank and Ava married in 1951 and divorced in 1953. It was, by most accounts, one of the most turbulent relationships either of them ever experienced. Nancy Sr. raised the 3 children largely on her own. What Warner Brothers was actually selling. In 1944, Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall began to have and have not. Bacall was 19. Bogart was 44 and married to Mayo Matho, his 3rd wife, a woman whose jealousy had become so legendary on the Warner lot that she had a nickname among the crew. The affair between Bogart and Bacall began during production. This was not a secret from the studio. Jack Warner's office knew within weeks. His wife knew and showed up on set to say so. Here is what most accounts of this story leave out. Warner Brothers did not try to stop it. They monitored it, managed it, and eventually decided when it would become public. Bogart's drinking had become a problem. His personal reputation, volatile, unreliable, difficult, was starting to affect how studios priced his contracts. A new love story, properly managed, was exactly the kind of narrative reset a publicity department could use. The studio waited until Bogart's divorce proceedings were at the right stage. Then they allowed the romance to become news in exactly the way they wanted it to become news. The story of Bogart and Bacall, the world-weary older man transformed by an extraordinary young woman, became one of the most celebrated love stories of the decade. Mathote died 6 years later. She gave only one interview about the marriage after the divorce. She said very little. The woman who wasn't allowed to choose. This is where the story changes direction. Because everything we've talked about so far involves men who made choices and women who paid for them. But the next case is about a woman who had no choices at all, and what happened the one time she tried to make one. Rita Hayworth began working for Columbia Pictures in the late 1930s. Harry Cohn, who ran the studio, recognized something in her immediately, not just beauty, a quality that audiences responded to that Cohn understood could be worth an extraordinary amount of money. Cohn had her hair dyed, her hairline changed, her name changed, her accent coached away. He remade her into what he needed her to be, and the result was one of the most iconic figures of 1940s cinema. He also controlled her personal life with a completeness that is difficult to fully comprehend today. Cohn had approval over who she was photographed with, who she dated publicly, when a relationship became news and when it quietly ended. He had people on his payroll whose job was to keep him informed of her movements. He saw Hayworth not as an employee but as an asset, a brand, and brands do not get to make spontaneous personal decisions. In 1948, Hayworth did something she had never done in 12 years of working for Columbia. She flew to Europe without asking permission, found Ali Khan, the playboy son of one of the wealthiest men in the world, and began what would become the most publicly scrutinized relationship of her life. Cohn found out from a journalist he had placed in her circle. He called her hotel room in Europe. He told her she had destroyed 12 years of his work. Not her work. His. That sentence tells you everything about what her life at Columbia had actually been. Every romance, every public image, every carefully managed photograph. It was his construction. She was the material he had used to build it. Katharine Hepburn was not allowed to attend the funeral of the man she loved. Rita Hayworth was not allowed to love a man unless she had clearance first. Two women, two forms of the same cage, neither one of them chosen. Lana Turner and the question no one asked. In April 1958, Lana Turner's 14-year-old daughter Cheryl Crane stabbed Turner's boyfriend Johnny Stompanato to death in the bedroom of their Beverly Hills home. The coroner ruled it justifiable homicide. Cheryl testified that she had intervened to stop Stompanato from attacking her mother. The case was closed. What the coverage of this case focused on, almost without exception, was the romance between Turner and Stompanato, a glamorous actress and a dangerous man. The tabloids had months of material. What almost no coverage focused on was a different question. In the years before this, Turner had been involved with Lex Barker, another in a long series of relationships, another marriage. Barker was later credibly accused, by Cheryl herself in her memoir, of having abused Cheryl during the time he was in the household. Cheryl wrote about this. She was direct about it. And the question that the press never pursued with any real determination was this: what did Lana Turner know, and when did she know it? Turner maintained a very specific public posture throughout her life. She was the victim of circumstances, the unlucky woman, the beautiful star betrayed by dangerous men. The narrative placed her always at the center of events she hadn't caused. The people in her household paid the cost of that narrative, particularly one person who was a child the entire time it was happening. The last night she was allowed near him. On the evening of May 19, 1962, at Madison Square Garden in New York, Marilyn Monroe stepped to a microphone in a dress that had been sewn directly onto her body and sang "Happy Birthday" to the President of the United States. The moment has been described, replayed, and analyzed 10,000 times. What gets less attention is what happened immediately afterward. Within days of that performance, the phone numbers Monroe had been using to reach the Kennedy Circle stopped working. Her calls were redirected. The access she had been given, quietly, carefully, always with a layer of distance maintained, was withdrawn. That performance was not a spontaneous romantic gesture by a woman in love. It was a carefully managed event, approved at multiple levels, that served a specific purpose at a specific moment. And when that purpose had been served, the arrangement ended. Monroe was dead 14 weeks later. She was 36 years old. The men who had managed her access to that world were still alive, still prominent, still giving interviews about how much they had cared for her, for decades afterward. The man who turned a divorce into a weapon. Now we come to the story that almost nobody knows. Because everyone who knows Ingrid Bergman's story knows the affair with Roberto Rossellini. That has been told many times. What has not been told, or at least not told directly, is what her husband did with it. Petter Lindström was a Swedish neurosurgeon who had spent a decade in America building the infrastructure of Bergman's career. He managed her finances, negotiated her contracts, and shaped her professional life while she became one of the most celebrated actresses in the world. He was, by his own account and the account of people who knew them, a man who saw himself as indispensable to what she had built. In 1948, Bergman traveled to Italy to work with the director Roberto Rossellini. The relationship that developed resulted in a pregnancy. This became, in 1949, one of the largest scandals in Hollywood history. A United States senator stood on the floor of Congress and called her a threat to American values. Lindström did not rush to the press. He did not make statements. He contacted his lawyers. Here is what the record shows. Lindström had become aware that something was developing between Bergman and Rossellini well before the pregnancy became public knowledge. He had access to correspondence. He was in communication with people who were with Bergman in Italy. He waited. When Bergman filed for divorce, Lindström did not fight for the marriage. He did not appeal to her publicly or privately to come back. He went to court and he fought for one thing, their daughter Pia. He won. Pia Lindstrom was 10 years old when her mother's affair became front-page news. She went from 10 to 18 without seeing her mother regularly. She learned about her mother's life, her new husband, her new children, her exile from Hollywood, her return, the same way strangers did, through press coverage. In 1951, Bergman's lawyers attempted to have Pia travel to Italy for a visit. The case went before a judge. The judge brought Pia into the courtroom and asked her directly whether she wanted to go. Pia said she loved her mother, but she did not want to go. Bergman did not see her daughter for 8 years. The affair with Rossellini has been described, by Bergman herself and by her admirers, as an act of personal authenticity, a woman refusing to live a lie, an artist following her truth. What Petter Lindstrom understood, and what his lawyers built an entire custody case around, was that a narrative can be framed 2 ways. From one direction, it is a love story about a woman following her heart. From another direction, it is documented evidence of a mother who abandoned her child. He didn't stop the affair, he documented it. He waited. And then he presented it in a courtroom in Los Angeles in the language most useful to him. Rossellini ended the marriage in 1957. Bergman returned to Hollywood. She won an Academy Award for Anastasia. The audience at the ceremony gave her a standing ovation. Petter Lindstrom watched this from a distance. He had already won the thing he had gone to court for. The man she called her friend. In 1967, a journalist asked Katharine Hepburn what Spencer Tracy had meant to her. She said, "We were very good friends." 27 years, no public acknowledgement, no photographs together at events, no ring, no ceremony, no standing beside him when he received his final tributes. She kept the secret the way a person keeps a secret that costs them something real, quietly, consistently, and with a composure that people mistook for indifference. After Tracy died, she gave an interview in which she spoke about what he had given her. She described him as the most honest person she had ever known, the most direct, the most real. She did not say the word love in that interview, not once, and after that, she rarely spoke of him at all. She lived for another 36 years. She made films, she gave lectures, she wrote a memoir. She became, if anything, more celebrated in her older years than she had been at the peak of her career. She never said he was the love of her life. She never said he wasn't. What she did say, once, near the end, was this: that she had always believed the most important thing a person could do was get on with things, that looking back was a luxury, that the life in front of you was the only life worth concerning yourself with. It is a philosophy that takes a certain kind of strength to hold, especially when the life in front of you is one you built around an absence. What all 12 of them had in common. Let's be precise about what these 12 stories share. In each one, at least one person made a decision, a deliberate, considered decision, to protect a public image over a private relationship. In each one, that decision required the active management of someone else's reality, someone else's knowledge, someone else's right to understand what was actually happening in their own life. Judy Lewis learned her father's identity from a magazine. Pia Lindstrom learned her mother had a new baby from the press. Patricia Neal made a decision about her own body under conditions that were not freely chosen. Nancy Sinatra heard her marriage was ending on the radio. These were not accidents. They were the outcomes of systems. Systems built deliberately, maintained carefully, and protected with money and influence, and the considerable machinery of an industry that had very strong reasons to keep its investments intact. None of the stars on this list were naive about what they were doing. These were sophisticated, experienced, professionally intelligent people. They understood image management. They understood what the public could know and what it couldn't. They made choices with full awareness of their consequences. The question is not whether they knew. The question is who they decided should bear the cost. What you do with this. Here is what is interesting about looking back at these stories from this distance. Most of the stars involved have been, in the years since, largely rehabilitated. Their affairs are discussed as fascinating footnotes to otherwise celebrated careers. Their films are shown in revival theaters. Their photographs hang in museums. Their names are attached to Lifetime Achievement Awards. The people they left carrying the weight of those secrets are not generally the ones whose names appear in museum captions. Katharine Hepburn is remembered as one of the greatest actresses of the 20th century. Spencer Tracy is remembered as one of the finest film actors who ever lived. Their 27-year relationship is described, regularly, as one of Hollywood's great love stories. It was also a secret that one of them kept so completely that she could not stand beside the other at his funeral. Whether that is a love story depends almost entirely on whose perspective you choose to stand in. Looking at all 12 cases, there is one question worth sitting with long after this video ends. Every person in these stories made a choice about which truth they were willing to live with. Some chose the public truth and paid for it in private. Some chose the private truth and paid for it publicly. And some, the ones with the most resources, the most institutional protection, the best lawyers, and the most carefully managed press, chose to make someone else choose for them. The affairs are over. The studios that protected them are changed beyond recognition. Most of the people in these stories have been dead for decades, but the shape of the choice, protecting the image, letting someone else carry the cost, that shape did not end in 1960. That shape is recognizable in every era. Before you go, looking at these 12 stories, I want to ask you something directly. Katharine Hepburn spent 27 years protecting a man who could never give her his name in public. Some people hear that and call it the most devoted love they can imagine. Others hear it and wonder why she accepted those terms for as long as she did. Which side are you on? And if you have ever kept a secret that ended up costing you more than you expected, I'd genuinely like to hear about that in the comments. If this kind of history is what you come here for, there is more of it waiting for you on this channel. The stories that didn't make the official version. The ones that took decades to surface. The ones where what actually happened is considerably more complicated than what was reported at the time. Stay with us.